Hello everybody, my name is Eric, this is my YouTube channel Gun Gamers, and we have not done this kind of video in a while where I just sit down and talk to you about an airsoft gun that I think is really kind of cool. So buckle up because we're going to talk all about the Krytac TR-47. Now, I'm going to start off by saying I do not dare call this an unbiased airsoft gun review. This is just my experience and my overall opinion of this gun and what I've done with it, and that's just going to be totally subjective and very biased because I was sent this by Krytac as a very nice gift a few years back. So thank you very much, Alan. It was really cool to get this in the mail after being excited for it for so many years. And I'm really excited about it again now because I've completely reconfigured it externally, which is just a super cool aesthetic on top of an already super cool gun. So what is an SR-47? And why did I just transition from saying TR-47 to SR-47? So, in the real firearms world, there was a gun called the Knights Armament SR-47. It is known that about 6 of them were ever made, and every now and then Knights Armament brings it to trade shows to show off because their owner is an absolute troll. But you will never be able to buy a real gun version of this, and that is why it is the perfect counter argument when somebody asks you why you bought an airsoft gun instead of a real gun. The big feature of the SR-47 is that it is an AR-15 platform rifle that accepts AK-47 magazines. And that is a super weird thing to do, and it turns out it may or may not have actually worked that well, hence why not that many were ever bought. I think it wound up being a case where, you know, the target SOF units they were trying to sell to were thinking, well, if we want to use a gun that uses AK magazines, then doesn't it make more sense to just use locally sourced AKs instead of using some weird high-speed hipster gun that's going to stand out like a sore thumb? So if you look at a lot of pictures of the early global war on terror, that's exactly what they did. And in airsoft, it is equally as kind of jank, because this is an M4 style of V2 gearbox that is now feeding from AK magazines that were designed to go in AK bodies, which use a V3 gearbox and a totally different hop-up unit. So the SR-47 has a super proprietary, super weird, curved feeding tube hop-up unit that goes in this upper receiver and makes a V2 gearbox feed from AK magazines within the size constraints of being reasonably accurate to the real SR-47. I'm sure if you put this up against a real one, there would be things that are off, but as I said, I will never have the opportunity to do that, so it's accurate enough for me. But on the note of magazines, this being an airsoft gun, one of the big considerations when buying any airsoft gun is what magazines actually fit, feed, and work in it. And my recommendations for magazines for this thing are going to be the Tokyo Marui and the Cyma steel AK-47 style magazines. These things are really what this gun was designed around because I think Krytac expected it to be a big hit in Japan, and mine actually was the Japanese edition that was exported, so I did keep the original rail and furniture just in case I want to ever convert it back, just for that little bit of history. But what that means is it was designed for Japanese spec magazines. So Tokyo Marui and CYMA spec magazines are going to be your best bet for any TR-47s that you're buying because they're trying to be accurate to what they see as the most widely available aftermarket spec. So E&L and LCT magazines also do fit and feed. They wobble a bit too much for my liking, and let's be honest, if you buy an SR-47 to not put steel AK mags in it as God intended, why are you buying an SR-47? In terms of battery storage, I just use buffer tube lipos in the hollow buffer tube. I rewired mine to Deans as well. It came with mini Tamiya connectors. I believe Krytac is shipping all of their newer guns with with Deans now. So if you buy one of these newer, you should have Deans connectors like you want in most airsoft guns these days. Krytac does ship this with a larger crane style stock. I swapped it to a Car 15 style stock because that seemed like a reasonable accessory to have for something that's kind of going for a global war on terror aesthetic. So, you know, it looks a little bit more like something that might have been actually used if this thing was ever bought in any quantity beyond 6. To that end, I also swapped out the forend. This came with a 9-inch length key mod rail system, which is real spec key mod, not airsoft spec key mod, but real spec key mod will pretty much accept both. And that basically means that it's actually beveled. Key mod is an outdated system at this point. It never really caught on that hard. So most of the TR-47 models that actually ship to the US now take M-LOK. But I personally really love the old school Picatinny rails. So I put on here, I believe Bolt manufactures this. This is their copy of the Knights Armament free float rail system in the length that would have been standard. My barrel length is a little bit off from the real SR-47, the 6 of them, but those came with 16-inch barrels. This had a 10-inch barrel. I actually put a 1-inch barrel extension to allow me to use this here Knights Armament style mock suppressor. This allows me to just look cool. The other accessory that I swapped out is the pistol grip. And this one's a little more noteworthy because if you're thinking of swapping out your pistol grip on your Krytac guns, an important note is that airsoft is airsoft and nobody likes working from the same spec, right? So Krytac's motor, I think, is just a little bit different in length and angle in the way that it engages than a lot of other pistol grip manufacturers are doing. So if you want to put an aftermarket airsoft pistol grip on here, I think the PTS grips generally work pretty well, but not the one that makes it way more vertical, the EPG-C. I recommend just using Krytac pistol grips. The standard pistol grip is pretty decent, and they also have the A2 style pistol grip that they make, and I put one of those on here and it works perfectly. So that is my recommendation of what to go for if you really want to swap the pistol grip on this thing. You could also swap the motor when you swap the pistol grip, but that's an extra expense and something to consider. And personally, I find the Krytac stock motor to be fine on an 11.1 LiPo. I am not a super heavy, like, tinker, tech, power gamer type of guy. I like my airsoft gun to work reliably every time I pull the trigger, and I find that the more I tinker around in a gearbox and try to speed up every little thing, the more quickly I just wear out parts. I mean, I just stripped the piston on this thing after 5 years of owning it. And for an AEG, I call that pretty acceptable service life before major parts service. What I will not call that acceptable was that mine did have mid-cap syndrome out of the box. If you're not familiar with mid-cap syndrome, that means that the first 20 or 30 BBs out of a mid-capacity magazine that's fully loaded will drop super aggressively because they're not feeding properly or being chambered properly before the air is propelling them out of the gun. So they come out at a much lower velocity. They don't hit the hop up the right way. So the BBs essentially just drop super quick. And that is called mid-cap syndrome. And that is what happens when your BBs are feeding up with too much pressure and they're actually misaligning your air nozzle, or they're trying to double feed your gun, so things are getting jammed up and it's not how it's supposed to work. And that's a matter of timing. So if you take apart your gearbox and you trim the tappet plate return spring, that will usually resolve mid-cap syndrome, because that will make your tappet plate and air nozzle return to their properly fully seated position quicker and more reliably, and that will usually alleviate mid-cap syndrome, because now the nozzle is cycling with that much more authority and that much more quickly, and it is fixing the timing of, the super heavy like BBs pushing up against it. So long ramble short, that I had to do pretty much immediately to fix this. I've never had mid-cap syndrome out of another Krytac, so I'm not sure if that was something to do with the weird proprietary hop-up or if it was something to do with just, I don't know, they got a spring that was a little soft. Speaking of the weird proprietary hop-up, you will not be able to put aftermarket hop-up chambers in this thing unless they are compatible specifically with Krytac SR-47s. The SR-47 hop-up unit, regardless of brand, is a weird, janky thing. It had to do the whole curved, feeding tube thing. It's real weird. So you will not be able to replace that with anything aftermarket, but you will be able to use aftermarket hop-up buckings and aftermarket barrels. So that is perfectly fine. You can do Maple Leaf, R-Hop, and all that other type of hop builds in here. I personally still run the stock hop-up bucking and nub because I usually run this thing on no heavier than 3.2s, and up to 3.2s, I think the hop-up does a pretty good job. It really is right around its sweet spot where you're not losing very much energy at all, but you're hopping the BBs really effectively at 2.8s and 3.0s. 3.2s, I start to lose a little bit of energy, but not enough that I really care that much about. They still shoot great. So, but if you really want to run heavier BBs in this thing, flat hop, R-hop, something like that, there's a million options and they will all work in this hop-up unit. It's very standard AEG, despite its weird molding. And the fact that it is molded in two pieces, never take those two pieces apart. Just don't do it. As for the gearbox, it's standard Krytac through and through. It is their Trident Nautilus gearbox. It works great. It's not like the most ridiculously high-speed technical thing ever. It did do a respectable 22 rounds per second on an 11.1 out of the box, and I call that very acceptable. I usually shoot this thing on semi-auto, but when you want to let it rip with full auto, it'll do it. So yeah, overall, this gun is kind of weird. It is definitely one of those guns where you are buying this not because it is the most practical thing to bring onto the airsoft field. I am telling you right now, in terms of performance, there is zero difference between this here Krytac TR-47 and any other Krytac Mark II Trident that you're going to see in their line. So it's very similar to, if you're familiar with VFC, if you're familiar with Krytac, right in that area. Like, if you know how those guns shoot, you know how this gun shoots. But with that level of, performance, you gain all of the weird proprietary stuff of an SR-47 platform in terms of the hop-up and in terms of, maybe there being some weird fitting, and you have to use very specific AK magazines. So is this the most crazy high performance min-max gun? No. Is it my personal favorite? Yes. Why is that? Because it's just so darn cool, in my opinion. So as a result, I find this thing to be very fun to skirmish. It just works great. I don't bring it to more hardcore milsim games because I don't feel like it's really in the spirit of something like Milsim West to have a hyper experimental gun that never existed. Maybe for an insurgency game, but definitely not for any impressions for force on force. But it is super cool, and I bring it to a lot of games just because it's fun to use a gun that never is going to be something I can touch otherwise. And reloading with AK mags like it's an AK while using an M4 magazine release because the little paddle that they put here is unusable. It's such a weird experience. You don't play with guns like this very often. It's so fun, and the fact that it exists in a form that is actually really skirmishable despite not being, every, crazy speed softer's fantasy of something that's going to win them the Speed QB tournament. It is cool, and it's very usable, and it is competitive. I would say that my personal Krytac TR-47 represents to me what I want out of an airsoft gun at this point in my airsoft hobby. I want guns that look reasonably accurate to believable firearms, that they have some history for, a certain role I want to play at some types of games, and have that ability to bring out that type of aesthetic in a very usable format. And I think that's super cool. I like airsoft games for the sake of that. It's very fun to be able to do that, and I think that's why airsoft is so cool, because it looks like real firearms. Obviously, everyone else has their own different priorities, and if your priorities are that you want something that's super easy to drop a max hop-up unit, an HPA system, and all that other stuff, I mean, HPA actually would probably be very straightforward in this, to be honest. You just have to make sure the nozzle plays nice with the hop-up unit, and that would be your only major intersection. You can't replace the hop-up unit. So yeah, if those types of things are super important to you and you want the easiest, most seamless experience with a gun, you're not going to get that with the Krytac TR-47. But if you're a turbo nerd who wants to replace a bunch of parts on it and make it look like a gun that they're legally not able to accurately replicate, because Knight's Armament does still own the trademark on it. If you're that type of person, I highly recommend it. I think it is the best of the SR-47s on the market because of its hop-up unit and because of its ability to feed consistently and not have that many issues once you figure out some quirks. Could you buy a Cyma or a Bolt and also have an awesome time? Probably, but I got this one for free and I really like it. So as a result, those are my thoughts. If you're interested in this gun, there's several different retailers who sell it, but my friends at Amped Airsoft will be more than happy to order one in for you if you want, if they don't have them in stock. Thank you to everybody who just watched this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you liked this video, do all those YouTube things like, comment, and subscribe. Check out our website, gungamersproductions.com. We run games now. That's something that we've been really excited about, and it's really fun to do. And something like this would be right in place in our rifleman class. So anyway, I just want to say thank you for watching this video. If you want more where I just talk about crazy guns that are a little bit weird and I just get way too excited about the particular details of builds, let me know. If not, also let me know. Thank you, and until the next video, peace.